Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are not just telling a story of war. We are witnessing the resurrection of legends. We are diving into a corner of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, where history's greatest spirits are forged anew in the fires of the 42nd millennium. Two souls have returned. One is a shield, the other is a spear. But in a galaxy that knows only slaughter, can even a saint survive without becoming a monster? Today we witness the fall of the first miracle, Jehanne, as she crashes into a world drowning in heresy. And make sure you stay until the very final moments of this video, because the instant Jehanne attempts to offer mercy to a creature of pure malice, delivers a brutal lesson about the nature of this universe that will shatter her innocence forever. It is a twist that defines everything to come. The story begins now. Please like and subscribe to support our journey through the warp. Chapter 1. The Scream in the Ruined Cathedral. The sky above the Basilica of the Thousand Lamps cracked open, exposing the bleeding wound of reality itself. It was not the familiar purple bruise of a warp storm, but a tear of blinding absolute white, a singularity that screamed as it violated the eternal gloom of the hive world. From this celestial rupture, a comet did not fall. A body did. It plummeted with the weight of judgment tearing through the smog layers, turning the heavy industrial clouds into trails of vapor. Below the basilica was already a slaughterhouse. The Saint of Cinders, a false prophet swollen with the dark gifts of unassigned warp entities, stood amidst the rubble of the altar. His skin was a landscape of charred flesh and magma veins, his voice a grinding tectonic plate of mockery. He held a terrified girl, Mireille, by the throat, dangling her over a chasm where the floor had given way to the underhive fires. The congregation huddled in the shadows, their prayers strangled by the stench of burning promethium. Then the impact hit. The roof of the great cathedral shattered, raining stained glass like a storm of razor-sharp gems. The figure struck the nave with the force of an orbital bombardment. Marble slabs, centuries old and inscribed with the names of martyrs, were pulverized instantly. A shockwave of pure kinetic force blasted outward, knocking the Saint of Cinders back a step and forcing the terrified cultists to shield their eyes from the debris. Silence, heavy and suffocating, descended upon the ruins. From the crater of impact, a golden haze began to rise, smelling not of ozone, but of lilies and old iron. A figure stirred within the dust. Jehanne rose. She was not clad in the ceramite of the Astartes or the flak armor of the guard, but in plate mail that shimmered with an inner luminescence. In her hand she gripped the fractured shaft of a banner, its fabric singed, but the heraldry unmistakably defiant. She did not draw a sword. She did not scream a war cry. Instead, she looked at the cowering survivors, then at the monstrous false saint. With a grunt of exertion, she slammed the broken end of her banner into the cracked stone floor. Thoom! It was not a sound of destruction, but of anchoring. A ripple of golden light pulsed from the impact point, washing over the debris. Where the light touched the falling rocks, deflected harmlessly. The dust settled instantly. It was a sanctuary, a circle of absolute order, carved out of chaos. Mireille, released from the false prophet's grip during the tremor, scrambled backward, her eyes wide as she stared at the glowing figure who stood like a wall between her and the monster. Another pretender. The Saint of Cinders laughed, the sound like coals shifting in a furnace. He stepped forward, his maul dripping with the blood of the priesthood. The corpse emperor sends me a girl, a shining trinket to decorate my altar. Jehanne did not flinch. She pulled the banner from the stone and held it with both hands, not as a weapon, but as a staff of office. Her eyes burning with a terrifying naivety, locked onto the monster. "I see the pain in you." Jehanne's voice rang out clear and melodious, utterly alien to the guttural dialect of this world. This darkness, it is not your master. Cast it aside. There is still time for grace. The air in the cathedral seemed to freeze. Even the cultists paused. In the grim darkness of the far future, no one spoke of grace. They spoke of purging. They spoke of fire. Jehanne lowered her guard slightly, extending a hand in an offer of redemption that transcended millennia. It was a mistake. The Saint of Cinders roared a sound of pure, predatory delight. Grace is for the weak, he lunged, moving with a speed that belied his bulk, his maul swinging in a lethal arc aimed at Jehanne's exposed head. Jehanne was fast, but she was frozen by her own compassion. She hesitated, her mind unable to process the absolute rejection of her mercy. The maul was inches from her skull when a jagged piece of masonry sailed through the air and struck the false saint squarely in the eye. It was Mireille. The girl was shaking, terrified, but her arm was still outstretched. The distraction was microscopic, a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Jehanne's instincts, honed in 100 forgotten battles, overrode her philosophy. She didn't strike back. She raised the banner shaft in a parry that defied physics. The maul collided with the golden wood, unleashing a thunderclap that shattered the remaining windows. Jehanne slid back 10 meters, her boots carving deep grooves into the stone. But she stood. She looked at Mireille, and then back at the laughing monster. The light in Jehanne's eyes shifted. The softness evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a soldier who realizes the negotiation is over. I understand now, Jehanne whispered, the sound vibrating with power. There is no courtroom here, only the executioner's block. And for the first time, the golden light around her flared hot, searing the shadows away. Chapter 2. The Lioness of the Moon. The moon of Viridian Secundus was not a world. It was a cage. The atmosphere was thin, tasting of sulfur and despair, and the gravity was heavy enough to crush the hope out of a man's chest. Here, millions of slaves toiled in the open-pit Promethean mines, their lives measured in quotas and whippings. The overseers, augmented brutes with neural whips grafted to their arms, patrolled the perimeter on hover skiffs, looking for any sign of weakness to punish. There was no warning, no celestial choir, no tearing of the veil. There was simply a roar that drowned out the mining drills, followed by a streak of fire that painted the gray sky in violent red. The object slammed into the center of the primary fortification, the bastion of compliance, with the force of a kinetic kill vehicle. The impact didn't just break the walls, it liquidated them. A mushroom cloud of dust and pulverized ferrocrete bloomed into the vacuum-thin air, sending shock waves that knocked the hovering skiffs out of the sky. Silence followed the devastation, but it was the silence of a predator inhaling before the kill. From the smoking crater, a silhouette rose. She was not delicate. She was a mountain of muscle and fury, clad in furs that seemed to writhe with static electricity, and armor plates scavenged from the hulls of dead starships. Boudica stepped onto the scorched earth. She did not look at the sky. She looked at the chains. A surviving overseer, half his face torn away by the blast, staggered to his feet. He leveled a heavy bolter at the intruder, his programming overriding his fear. "Identify," he gargled through a ruined vox grill. "By the authority of the High Lords, identify yourself." Boudica turned. Her hair was a mane of copper wire and blood-matted locks. She held a weapon that defied classification, a massive slab of jagged metal torn from the wreckage of her own arrival, glowing with heat. She didn't offer a prayer. She didn't offer mercy. "Your High Lords are not here." She growled, her voice low and dangerous, like the rumble of a dying engine. "But I am." The overseer fired. The bolt shell detonated against Boudica's shoulder, but she didn't fall. She didn't even slow down. She leaned into the explosion, letting the shrapnel bite into her skin, fueling her rage. She moved with the momentum of a runaway train. In 3 strides, she closed the distance. She didn't use technique. She used brutality. She swung the slab of metal, catching the overseer in the chest. The sound of ceramite and bone shattering together was sickeningly loud. He was launched across the mining pit, a broken ragdoll testifying to her strength. More guards poured out of the bunkers, weapons raised. Boudica slammed her weapon into the ground, cracking the bedrock. Sparks of red lightning, warp-tainted, wild and angry, danced around her boots. "You took their lives," she shouted, her voice amplifying unnaturally, echoing off the canyon walls. "Now I take yours. The debt is due." It was not a duel. It was an extermination. She tore through the ranks of the oppressors, a whirlwind of violence. She didn't shield the weak. She obliterated the strong. Every blow was a sentence, every kill a receipt for centuries of suffering. When the dust settled, the bastion was a ruin. The remaining overseers had fled or were smeared across the rock. Boudica stood atop a pile of debris, breathing heavy steam rising from her blood-soaked armor. She looked down into the mining pit. Thousands of slaves stared up at her, trembling. They held their pickaxes and drills, uncertain if this was a liberation or just a change of management. They waited for her to speak, to tell them they were saved. Boudica spat a mouthful of blood onto the ground. She pointed her weapon at the cowering masses. "Why are you on your knees?" she roared. "The cage is open. Do you wait for permission to breathe?" She kicked a crate of las rifles off the edge of the platform. It crashed open among the slaves. "I am not your savior. I am your anger given form. Pick them up. If you want freedom, you will pay for it in blood." One by one, the slaves reached for the weapons. The fear in their eyes began to harden into something colder, something dangerous. They were no longer miners. They were the sons of the Lion. And their queen had just declared war on the galaxy. Chapter 3. The Price of Order. The bridge of the inquisitorial cruiser Blade of Doctrine smelled of incense and ozone, a sterile scent designed to mask the stench of the thousands of indentured servitors hardwired into the ship's cogitator banks. It was a cathedral of silence, broken only by the rhythmic chanting of the binary priests and the hum of the void shields. Inquisitor Severin Hale stood on the strategium deck. He was a man carved from gray stone, his face a map of scars that had healed but never faded. He wore no power armor, only a reinforced trench coat, and the rosette of his office, a symbol that carried more weight than a planetary governor's entire army. He did not look at the stars with wonder. To him, the galaxy was a patient on an operating table, rotting alive from a million different cancers. Lord Inquisitor Voidmaster spoke from the crew pit, her voice trembling slightly. "Long-range augurs have confirmed the signature. Mining Station Theta 9. It is confirmed. Warp spore contamination in the lower ventilation systems. The infection rate is 4%. Hale did not turn around. He stared at the hololith floating before him, a grainy, flickering image of a spinning metal construct housing 30,000 souls. Families, workers, loyal citizens of the Imperium. 4%, Hale repeated. His voice was dry, devoid of malice or pity. It was the voice of an accountant tallying a ledger. Projected spread. Total saturation within 72 hours, my lord the Voidmaster replied. We could deploy stormtroopers. We could purge the lower levels. We might save the officers and the specialized cogitators. Hale closed his eyes for a brief second. Behind his eyelids, the ghost of the Cygnus 4 system burned. He remembered the screams, He remembered how he had hesitated then, how he had tried to be a hero, tried to save the few, and ended up feeding 1 billion souls to the dark gods. He had been young then. He had believed that mercy was a virtue. Now he knew better. Mercy was a leak in the hull. "There is no might," Voidmaster Hale said, opening his eyes. They were cold gray and absolutely dead. Partial quarantines are how worlds die. We do not treat the symptom, we excise the tumor. He tapped a sequence of runes on the console before him. It was a movement so casual, so practiced, that it was terrifying. It was the same motion one might use to approve a supply request for recaf. Prepare the cyclonic torpedoes. Single volley. Pattern absolute. The bridge crew froze for a heartbeat. The order meant total annihilation. No evacuation, no distress beacon, just erasure. Lord the Voidmaster hesitated. There are children on. There are demons in the vents. Hale cut her off, his tone flat. Fire. The blade of doctrine shuddered slightly as the torpedoes left the tubes. On the view screen, 4 streaks of burning propellant raced toward the distant station. There was no grand battle, no desperate struggle. Seconds later, Theta 9 vanished. A silent blossom of fire expanded in the void, consuming steel flesh and hope in a single blinding flash. Then it was gone, just cooling debris drifting in the dark. Hale watched the explosion without blinking. He picked up a data slate, signed his name at the bottom of a report marked Expenditure of Ordnance, and set it down. Resuming patrol course, he said, turning his back on the graveyard he had just created, and flagged the Voidmaster for reconditioning. Her hesitation was noted. This was the true horror of the 41st millennium. Not the monster screaming in the dark, but the man who could sign a death warrant for thousands without his pulse rising a single beat. Chapter 4. 2 flames meet. The outskirts of Orem Him were a graveyard of good intentions. Here the golden spires of the inner sanctum gave way to the sprawling shantytown despair of the pilgrim camps. Jehanne stood amidst the mud, her armor gleaming like a beacon of impossible purity against the gray grime of the refugee tents. She was directing the flow of the wounded, her voice a calm melody that seemed to knit broken bones and soothe fevered brows simply by being heard. Then the ground shook. It was not the rhythmic thrum of artillery, but a jagged, heavy tremor. A dropship painted in the crude red of a stolen mining vessel roared overhead, its retro thrusters burning with dirty, unfiltered promethium. It didn't land. It crashed with style, gouging a trench through a derelict manufactorum yard 50 meters away. The ramp slammed down, crushing a pile of rubble. Boudica stormed out. She brought the smell of ozone and dried blood with her. Behind her, a ragtag group of liberated slaves, now armed with scavenged laser guns and wearing chains as trophies, fanned out, looking at the holy city not with reverence, but with hunger. Jehanne stepped forward to intercept the newcomers. She planted her feet, the tip of her banner resting in the mud. The 2 women stopped 10 paces apart. The silence that stretched between them was louder than the ship's cooling engines. It was a meeting of opposites. Jehanne was a statue of gold and silver, rigid, disciplined, a vertical line of order. Boudica was a storm trapped in human skin, covered in furs and ash, a horizontal force of destruction. Boudica spat on the ground, the saliva sizzling against a piece of hot metal. She looked Jehanne up and down, her eyes narrowing as they settled on the tattered golden thread banner. I heard the rumors, Boudica sneered, her voice like grinding gears. The Empire sent a doll to fight a war. You plan to stop a Baneblade with that tablecloth little girl? Or are you going to wave it until the enemy dies of laughter? Jehanne did not rise to the bait. Her expression remained serene, though her grip on the banner tightened until her gauntlets creaked. She looked at Boudica, not with fear, but with the pity a teacher feels for an unruly child. "This tablecloth." Jehanne replied, her voice cool and sharp as cut crystal has held up the spirits of kings when their armies fled. "It has rallied nations when all hope was lost. It is a symbol savage. Something you would not understand, given that you seem to drape yourself in garbage." Boudica bristled, stepping closer, the massive slab of metal in her hand, sparking with latent energy. "Symbols don't stop bullets. Rage does. I freed a moon while you were polishing your armor. I am the avalanche. You are just a speed bump in gold paint." "I am the shield," Jehanne countered, lifting her chin. "And you are a wildfire. Useful, perhaps, until you burn down the very house you claim to protect." The air between them shimmered. The golden light of the saint and the red lightning of the barbarian began to bleed into the physical world, the atmosphere humming with the pressure of two demigods preparing to collide. Boudica raised her weapon. Jehanne shifted her stance, ready to plant the standard. Then a sound tore through the tension. A siren, low, mournful, and deafening. It wailed from the high walls of Aurum Him, a sound that every citizen of the Imperium knew in their genetic code. Invasion. On the horizon, a cloud of red dust was rising. It was not a storm, it was an army. The ground began to vibrate with the marching of 10,000 boots and the roar of engines fueled by blood. Karzak Bloodtide had arrived. Boudica lowered her weapon, but kept her eyes on Jehanne. "Playtime is over, princess. Try not to die in the first 5 minutes. I hate stepping over corpses." "Stay out of my way," Jehanne said, turning her gaze toward the approaching dust cloud. "And try to kill the enemy, not the faithful." High above, in the cold silence of the void, Inquisitor Hale stood before the tactical plot of the Blade of Doctrine. Two distinct energy signatures pulsated on the hololith, one blindingly bright and stable, the other erratic and violent, moving side by side. The display washed his scarred face in a pale green light. He did not look impressed. He looked like a man examining a structural flaw in a bridge he had to cross. "They have met the Void Master," reported, her voice hushed. Hale tapped the glass of the display, right over the two blips. "If they are miracles," he murmured to himself, "I will audit them. If they are corruption, I will sanitize them." He turned away, his coat swirling around his ankles. "Keep the lance batteries charged. If one turns on the other, burn them both. I will not have a theological debate ruin my sector." Chapter 5. The Tide of Blood. The walls of Aurum Him screamed. It was not a metaphor. The sheer volume of bolter-fire chain-driven blades and the guttural roars of 100,000 cultists created a physical wall of noise that battered the soul. Below the parapets, the earth had disappeared, replaced by a churning ocean of red armor and pale flesh. Karzak Bloodtide had not brought an army. He had brought a migration of slaughter. On the western battlements, Saint-Jehanne was a lighthouse in a hurricane. Her golden barrier was expanded to its limit, a shimmering dome covering the main gate. Every impact against it, tank shells, rockets, screaming demon engines, sent ripples of agony through her body. But she did not falter. She was the shield. She held the line so the Imperial Guard could reload, so the civilians could flee deeper into the city. Hold Jehanne's voice amplified over the Voxcaster's calm amidst the bedlam. "Faith is your armor. They break against us." But on the eastern flank, patience had run out. Boudica stood on the edge of the wall, looking down at the carnage with a sneer. To her, this static defense was an insult. It was a cage. Below her, a champion of Khorne, a towering behemoth in brass armor, was butchering the local militia. "Enough waiting," Boudica growled. She didn't signal the commanders. She didn't check the tactical cogitators. She simply hefted her massive slab of metal and jumped. It was a 50-meter drop. She landed like a meteor, crushing the Khorne champion into paste before he could even raise his axe. The impact threw the surrounding cultists off their feet. Boudica rose, laughing, the red lightning of her rage arcing from her skin. "Sons of the Lion," she roared back at the wall. "To me, do you want to live forever?" Inspired by her madness, the liberated slaves abandoned their defensive posts. Screaming war cries, they vaulted over the walls, following their queen into the meat grinder. It was glorious. It was heroic. And it was a catastrophic mistake. Boudica carved a path of ruin through the enemy center, drunk on the violence. She was unstoppable, a whirlwind of death that drew the enemy's attention. But in her lust for battle, she failed to see the battlefield. By leading her forces into the fray, she had left the eastern sallyport undefended. A pack of Khorne berserkers, sensing the opening like sharks, scenting blood in the water, bypassed Boudica's brawl. They didn't engage her. They slipped through the gap she had left in the line. They weren't looking for a fight. They were looking for victims. They found the triage tents. Jehanne saw it happen. From her position at the gate, she saw the red blurs breach the perimeter. She saw the Sons of the Lion too far away, cheering as they butchered the front line, oblivious to the wolf in their den. "No," Jehanne screamed. She dropped the main barrier. It was a desperate gamble. "Guards suppress the front, I have the flank." She ran. She moved with a speed that blurred the air, abandoning the safety of the gate to intercept the berserkers. But she was too far. She was seconds too late. She crashed into the group of berserkers just as they reached the wounded. Her banner swept out, decapitating two, but a chain axe caught her in the side. The ceramite of her armor sparked and gave way. Pain, white-hot and blinding, lanced through her ribs. She didn't stop. She planted her feet and unleashed a pulse of light that threw the remaining killers back, but the damage was done. Miracle stood frozen near the medical supply crates. Her hands were covered in the blood of a soldier she had been trying to bandage. Now that soldier was headless. Around her, the triage tent was a charnel house. The berserkers hadn't just killed, they had desecrated. The silence that followed the brief skirmish was heavy with the accusation of the dead. Jehanne fell to one knee, clutching her bleeding side. Her golden light flickered dim and weak. She looked up past the carnage toward the field where Boudica was standing over a pile of corpses, cheering her victory. Boudica raised her weapon in triumph, unaware that behind her, the people she swore to avenge were lying in pieces. Miracle looked from the butchered wounded to the celebrating hero in the distance. Something in the girl's eyes broke. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the cold realization that power, even the power of a saint, was no guarantee of salvation. She didn't save them. Miracle whispered, her voice trembling, not with tears, but with anger. She traded them for glory. Chapter 6. No Sanctuary. High above the screaming atmosphere, the bridge of the Blade of Doctrine remained a sanctuary of terrifying calm. Inquisitor Severin Hale stood before the tactical oculus, his hands clasped behind his back. The battle below was reduced to abstraction runes of red and gold shifting on a grid of green light. He watched the collapse of the western flank. He saw the rune marking Subject Spear Boudica overextend. He saw the rune Subject Shield Jehanne flicker as it took damage trying to cover the mistake. Disappointing, Hale murmured. It was the tone of a master swordsman watching a novice trip over their own blade. They have power, yes, but they lack the discipline to wield it. They are not soldiers. They are children playing with a loaded bolter. The Void Master looked up from her console, her face pale. Lord, the Khornite forces are surging. The defensive line is fracturing. Shall we deploy the stormtroopers to reinforce the gap? Hale shook his head slowly. Reinforcement rewards failure, Void Master. it teaches dependency. If these entities claim to be the Emperor's chosen, let them prove they can survive his judgment. Hale walked to the gunnery station. The servitor hardwired into the console twitched as the Inquisitor's shadow fell over it. Target the primary engagement zone, Hale ordered. Load the lance batteries. Low yield. Precision strike. The gunnery officer hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. Lord, the Saints are in that grid. That is danger close. The thermal bloom alone could vaporize our own troops. Hale leaned in his voice, dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than a scream. I did not ask for a safety assessment. I am creating a crucible. If they are gold, the fire will refine them. If they are dross, they will burn. Fire. The order was absolute. The blade of doctrine rolled slightly as the capacitors discharged. A beam of coherent light, thick as a hab block, stabbed down from the heavens. On the surface, the world turned white. The lance strike didn't hit the combatants directly. It struck the no man's land between the retreating Imperial Guard and the advancing horde, instantly vaporizing a square kilometer of rock and flesh. The shockwave knocked both Jehanne and Boudica off their feet. The air was suddenly sucked away, replaced by a superheated vacuum that boiled the blood in the lungs of anyone not wearing power armor. Jehanne gasped, clutching her bleeding side, squinting through the blinding dust. This was not enemy fire. She knew the taste of this energy. It was Imperial. He is firing on us, she whispered, realizing the cold truth. The Inquisitor wasn't saving them. He was boxing them in. The beam had carved a molten canyon across the battlefield, cutting off any hope of retreat to the inner city. Behind them was a wall of liquid fire cooling rapidly into obsidian glass. In front of them, the army of Karzak Bloodtide roared in approval. To the Kornate worshippers, the orbital strike was just more violence, a divine signal that the arena was set. Karzak himself stepped through the smoke, his brass armor glowing with heat. He pointed his axe at the two women trapped between the orbital fire and his horde. Your corpse god abandons you, the demon prince bellowed. There is nowhere to run, only the slaughter remains. Boudica pulled herself up from the mud, coughing up black soot. She looked at the wall of fire behind her, then at the ocean of monsters in front. She realized they were alone. Truly alone. That bastard in the sky just locked the door. Boudica growled, gripping her weapon until her knuckles turned white. Fine. If we can't go back, we go through them. Chapter 7. The Dance of the Twin Saints. The heat from the orbital scar was suffocating, baking the mud into a cracked mosaic of despair. Karzak Bloodtide towered over them, a monument to butchery, his axe dripping with the essence of 1,000 martyrs. He did not rush. He stalked, savoring the fear, confident that his prey had nowhere to run. Jehanne leaned heavily on her banner. Her side was a mess of torn metal and wet crimson, her breathing ragged. Boudica stood 5 meters away, her chest heaving, her massive weapon dragging in the dirt. They were exhausted. They were broken, and they were staring death in the face. For a moment, the sounds of battle faded, the screaming cultists, the roaring fires, the distant artillery. It was just the two of them in the eye of the storm. Jehanne looked at Boudica. There was no judgment in her eyes now, no lecture about order or mercy. There was only the grim recognition of a fellow soldier in the trench. Boudica looked back. She wiped blood from her nose and grinned a feral, desperate baring of teeth. She nodded once. It was not a plan, it was an instinct. Karzak roared, tiring of the delay. He charged, moving with the momentum of a landslide. His target was Boudica. He swung his chain axe in a horizontal arc that would have bisected a battle tank. Boudica didn't block. She dropped flat to the ground, the blade whistling inches above her spine. Now she screamed, her voice cracking with strain. Jehanne was already moving. Ignoring the agony in her ribs, she sprinted. But she didn't aim for the monster's body. She aimed for the ground beneath his weapon. As Karzak's axe reached the end of its swing, momentarily overextended, Jehanne slid on her knees through the mud. With a cry that sounded like a choir of angels declaring war, she drove the jagged end of her banner into the earth, hooking the haft of Karzak's axe. "I am the wall," Jehanne shouted. Golden light exploded from the impact point. It solidified instantly, locking the demon prince's weapon in a vice of holy energy. Karzak wrenched at it, confused, his immense strength suddenly useless against the absolute immobility of the saint's will. He was trapped for only a second, but a second was all the queen of the wasteland needed. Boudica didn't attack from the ground. She sprinted toward Jehanne. In a fluid motion born of desperation, she stepped onto Jehanne's armored shoulder, using the saint as a launch pad. Jehanne braced herself, gritting her teeth, as the barbarian's weight drove her deeper into the mud. Boudica launched herself into the air. She hung there for a heartbeat, silhouetted against the burning sky, her maul raised high. The red lightning around her didn't crackle anymore. It thundered. It gathered into the head of her weapon, turning the iron white hot. "Your account is closed." Boudica roared, her voice echoing with the authority of a judge pronouncing a death sentence. "Payment is taken in full." She came down like a hammer on an anvil. Her weapon struck Karzak squarely on the helmet. There was no crunch of bone. There was a boom, a sonic boom that cleared the smoke for 100 meters. The kinetic force drove the demon prince's head down into his torso, and his torso down into the ground. Red lightning and golden light collided, mixing into a shockwave that vaporized the nearest cultists. Karzak, blood-tied, didn't scream. He simply ceased to exist as a biological entity reduced to a crater of brass and gore. The shockwave knocked both women back. They landed in the mud, gasping, battered but alive. Around them, the Cornette horde froze. Their champion was gone. The momentum of the blood god halted, broken by two women who refused to die. High above on the bridge of the Blade of Doctrine, the tactical display flashed a warning, high-energy discharge detected. Inquisitor Hale's finger hovered over the rune that would unleash the second lance strike. He watched the readings. He saw the demon's signature vanish. He saw the two saints still standing amidst the devastation. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled his hand back. "Cancel the second volley." Hale said, his voice quiet. He watched the two blips on the screen, a flicker of genuine curiosity breaking his stone facade. "It seems the laboratory rats have learned to cooperate." "Interesting." He turned to the comms officer. "Send down the Valkyries. Retrieve them. I want to see these weapons up close before they rust." Chapter 8. A feast of suspicion. The victory feast in the governor's palace was a hollow affair. Outside the city of Orem Him burned with the fires of cremation pyres, the smoke choking out the stars. Inside the gilded hall, the air was thick with the smell of roasted groks and expensive wine, but no one was eating. The local nobles sat in terrified silence, their eyes darting between the three figures at the high table. Inquisitor Hale sat in the center. He did not look like a savior. He looked like a coroner reviewing a cadaver. He cut his meat with precise surgical movements, ignoring the blood-crusted armor of the two women sitting on either side of him. "You eat as if you didn't just try to incinerate us from orbit." Boudica growled, stabbing a knife into the wooden table. The vibration knocked a goblet of wine over, spilling a red stain across the white cloth. Hale didn't look up. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "I provided a tactical motivation, and it worked. The demon is dead. The city stands. That is the only metric that matters. We are not your dogs to be kicked into compliance. Boudica snarled, half rising from her chair. The air around her began to heat up, the candles on the table flickering violently. We bled for this city while you watched from your throne in the sky. Hale finally raised his eyes. They were dead gray oceans. He placed his silverware down with a soft click. You bled because you were undisciplined, Hale said, his voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. I reviewed the picked feeds. You, Queen, abandoned your post for glory. And you, Saint, abandoned your command to clean up her mess. The result, 300 wounded soldiers in the triage tents were butchered because the flank was exposed. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing through them. You think you are heroes? No. You are powerful, yes. But you are blunt, rusted weapons. If you make a mistake like that again, if your incompetence costs me another strategic asset, I will not fire a warning shot next time. I will finish the job. Boudica's hand went to the handle of her maul. The threat was clear, and her instinct was to crush the source of it. Try it, little man. See what happens when you threaten a storm. Stop, Jehanne's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a tombstone. Boudica froze, looking at her partner. Jehanne was staring at her own reflection in her empty plate. She looked older than she had that morning. The light in her eyes was dim. He is right, Jehanne whispered. She didn't look at Hale. She looked at her hands. We left them. I should have held the gate. I let my emotions dictate the tactic. The blood of the infirmary is on my hands. Boudica stared at her, incredulous. You're agreeing with him. He just threatened to execute us. He speaks the truth of war, Jehanne replied, her voice hollow. Victory without discipline is just delayed defeat. Boudica stood up, her chair crashing backward onto the marble floor. She looked from the cold, calculating inquisitor to the broken, repentant saint. You make me sick, Boudica spat at Jehanne. You have the power of a god, but the soul of a slave. Keep your guilt. I'm going to find a drink that doesn't taste like boot polish. She stormed out of the hall, the heavy doors slamming shut behind her with a sound like a gunshot. Hale picked up his wine glass, swirling the dark liquid. He looked at Jehanne, who sat motionless. Your friend is volatile. That is a liability. She is free, Jehanne said softly, and I am tired. Far out in the darkness of the system's edge, the vessel was not a ship of the Imperium. It was a cathedral of twisted bone and screaming metal drifting in the silent void. In the meditation chamber, Dark Apostle Electoris watched the recording of the battle on a floating sphere of blood. He saw the moment of victory, but he also saw the aftermath. He saw the friction in the great hall recorded by a servo's skull he had corrupted weeks ago. He smiled. His teeth were filed into points, and his eyes were black pits of malice. Two flames, he whispered, his voice like dry leaves skittering on stone. So bright, so hot. But they do not burn together. One seeks a master to serve, the other seeks a master to kill. He waved his hand, and the image changed to Jehanne's sorrowful face. The warrior is too angry to listen. But the martyr is drowning in doubt. And doubt, Electoris chuckled, is the open door. Chapter 9. The Venom of Words. The air in the Plaza of Tears was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and desperation. Thousands of refugees displaced by the war huddled under the statues of weeping angels, their eyes hollow with hunger. Jehanne walked among them, her armor cleaned of blood, but her spirit heavy. She sought order. She sought a way to feed the flock, believing that if the belly was full, the spirit would calm. Archbishop Morvath approached her, his robes pristine, a stark contrast to the filth of his congregation. He was an old man, his skin like parchment, his eyes seemingly filled with sorrow. My Lady St. Morvath bowed low, his voice trembling with feigned reverence. The ecclesiarchy hears the cries of the faithful. We have opened the deep vaults, the reserve granaries. It is not much, but it is sustenance. Jehanne exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. Finally, the institutions were working. You do the Emperor's work, Father. Distribute it immediately. I will stand guard to ensure there is no stampede. She smiled at him. It was a genuine smile of relief. She believed she was finally protecting them, not just killing for them. The heavy blast doors of the granary groaned open. The smell that wafted out was sweet, too sweet for grain. It smelled of rotting flowers and ozone. But the starving masses didn't care. They surged forward, hands grasping, mouths open. Jehanne stood on the steps, her banner planted, acting as a gentle barrier to keep the flow orderly. She watched as mothers fed their children a gray gruel-like paste that shimmered slightly in the dim light. Eat, Jehanne whispered, watching a young boy wolf down a bowl. The Emperor provides. But as the boy finished, he didn't smile. He stopped chewing. His eyes rolled back, revealing whites laced with purple veins. He looked at his mother, not with love, but with a sudden primal terror. Monster. The boy hissed, his voice deepening into a growl. You are a monster. The madness did not ripple. It exploded. In seconds, the plaza turned into a pit of vipers. The grain had been laced not with arsenic, but with the dust of the warp. It was a psychotropic trigger, a chemical compound blessed by the dark gods to strip away reason and replace it with pure, hallucinogenic paranoia. A woman clawed at her own face, screaming that spiders were hatching under her skin. A man beat his neighbor to death with a loaf of bread that had turned to stone in his mind. The air filled with the sounds of tearing flesh and insane laughter. Jehanne froze. The order she had tried to build was dissolving into a chaos more absolute than the battlefield. She reached out to stop a man from strangling his wife, but he recoiled from her touch, his skin burning. Demon, the man shrieked at Jehanne, his mind broken. Get away, your light burns. Jehanne spun around, looking for Morvath. The Archbishop stood on the balcony above the granary, looking down at the bedlam. He wasn't horrified. He was smiling. Jehanne leaped up the stairs, grabbing the old man by his collar, lifting him off his feet. What have you done? She screamed, shaking him. What is in the food? Morvath didn't struggle. He laughed, but the voice that came out of his throat was not his own. It was a dry, rasping whisper, the voice of Alectoris. I gave them what they wanted, little saint, the Archbishop gargled, black ichor leaking from his eyes. You promised them safety in the cage of the corpse emperor. I gave them the truth. The only freedom is madness. He looked deep into Jehanne's eyes. You trusted the robe, not the man. Your blind faith is the poison. Morvath's body went limp, the life fleeing him as the dark presence withdrew, leaving Jehanne holding a corpse, while the city below her tore itself apart. She dropped him, falling to her knees. She had tried to save them, and she had hand-fed them their doom. Chapter 10. The Split. The strategic counseling chamber of the governor's palace was a fortress of silence, shattered only by the sound of a heavy iron table being overturned. Boudica didn't just enter the room. She breached it. She threw the heavy oak doors open so hard they cracked against the stone walls. In her hand, she clutched a handful of the tainted grain, glowing faintly with the sick, violet hue of the warp. She hurled it across the room. The kernels scattered like buckshot, bouncing off the polished breastplate of Inquisitor Hale and skittering to Jehanne's feet. You fed them poison! Boudica screamed, her voice shaking the chandeliers. While you were playing dress-up with the priests, they were poisoning the wells. Jehanne stood by the window, looking out at the smoke rising from the lower city. She did not turn around. She looked smaller in her armor today, the golden light around her dim and flickering like a dying candle. I did not know, she whispered. Ignorance is not an excuse. Boudica roared, stalking forward, the heat from her body warping the air. It is a crime. I told you these silk-wearing parasites couldn't be trusted. I told you they would stab us in the back the moment we looked away. Boudica slammed her fist into the wall, cracking the plaster. She turned to Hale, then pointed a trembling finger at the upper spires of the city, the district of the ecclesiarchy and the nobility. I am done with your rules. Boudica declared, her eyes burning with the red lightning of execution. I am taking my sons. We are going up to the spire, and we are going to kill every single one of them. Every priest, every noble, every bureaucrat who signed a paper today. Jehanne finally turned. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her eyes widened in horror. Boudica, no. That is madness. You cannot slaughter an entire district. There are innocents there, servants, children, acolytes who know nothing of the betrayal. Innocents, Boudica laughed, a harsh barking sound. There are no innocents in a nest of vipers, Jehanne. If you leave one alive, the rot comes back. We burn it all. That is the only way to be sure. Jehanne stepped forward, raising a hand to block Boudica's path. I will not let you become a butcher. We are here to save this world, not purge it. Boudica stopped. She looked at Jehanne's hand, then up at her face. The look of disgust she gave the saint was more painful than any physical blow. She didn't strike Jehanne. She simply brushed her hand aside as if it were a cobweb. Save it, Boudica sneered. You aren't saving anything. You are just managing the graveyard. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Your faith is blind, sister. You stare so hard at the light that you never see the knife coming. And because of you, thousands are screaming their minds out in the gutters right now. Boudica stepped back, turning her back on the saint and the inquisitor. I am done listening to cowards. The sons of the lion ride tonight. If you try to stop us, Jehanne, I will go through you too. Boudica stormed out, her heavy boots echoing down the corridor. Moments later, the sound of engines revving roared from the courtyard chimeras and stolen trucks loaded with the liberated slaves, eager for the blood of the rich. In the silence of the war room, Hale slowly brushed the grain off his coat. He looked at Jehanne, who stood frozen, watching her only ally leave to commit a massacre. The bond is broken. Hale noted, his voice devoid of emotion. He walked to the window, watching the convoy of the Sons of the Lion tear through the palace gates, heading for the upper city. You have a choice, St. Hale said, not looking at her. You can chase her and start a civil war, or you can stay here and try to clean up the mess you made in the plaza. Choose quickly. The clock is ticking. Jehanne looked at the door and then at the city burning below. She fell to her knees, burying her face in her hands. The Golden Saint was alone. Chapter 11. The Suicide City. The spire of Orem did not burn like a normal city. It burned like a sacrificial pyre. Boudica and her Sons of the Lion had breached the gilded gates, and what followed was not a revolution, but a deluge of violence. The marble floors of the ecclesiarchy's administrative wing were slick with the blood of scribes, priests, and functionaries. Boudica swung her maul, smashing a statue of a weeping saint into gravel. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide and manic. Root them out, she screamed to her followers. Burn the nests, leave no stone on top of another. But in her blind fury, she did not see the floor beneath her boots. The blood of the slain did not pool randomly. It flowed into the ancient decorative grooves, cut into the architecture grooves that formed the 8-pointed star. With every swing of her weapon, with every judgment she delivered, she was not cleansing the city. She was feeding it. The air grew heavy, humming with a low frequency that made teeth ache. The slaughter was not ending the corruption. It was completing the ritual. Far below, in the Plaza of Tears, Jehanne was drowning in a sea of madness. The population, driven insane by the tainted grain, had turned on each other with cannibalistic fury. Jehanne stood in the center of the mob, her banner raised, but for the first time, her golden light offered no comfort. She pushed a screaming man away, with the shaft of her standard trying not to hurt him. But he lunged back, biting at her armored greaves. "Stop," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Please, look at me. Remember who you are." But there was no recognition in their eyes. Only the warp stared back. A woman Jehanne had helped feed yesterday threw a cobblestone that clanged off her pauldron. A child she had blessed tried to stab her with a shard of glass. Jehanne fell back overwhelmed. She couldn't fight them. To fight them was to massacre them, and to massacre them was to accept that they were already lost. She was the shield, but she had nothing left to protect. High above the planetary screams, the bridge of the Blade of Doctrine was silent as a tomb. Inquisitor Hale stood before the hololith, watching the infection metrics spike into the red. The graph was a vertical line. Psychic resonance at critical mass, the Void Master reported, her voice hollow. The bloodshed in the spire is acting as a catalyst. The barrier between real space and the warp is dissolving. Estimated time to demon incursion, less than an hour. Hale closed his eyes. He saw the faces of the dead from Cygnus IV. He saw the children burning. He saw the price of hesitation. He had hoped for a brief flicker of a moment that these saints could rewrite the script. But he was right. He was always right. Hope was just the first step on the road to disappointment. "It is done," Hale said softly. There was no anger in his voice, only a profound, crushing fatigue. The experiment has failed. He walked to the command lectern. He produced a heavy iron key from his coat and inserted it into the console. The mechanism clicked a sound of finality that echoed across the bridge. "Initiate protocol absolution," Hale ordered. The crew hesitated for a fraction of a second, the weight of the order pressing down on them. To declare exterminatus was to murder a world to save a sector. It was the ultimate sin and the ultimate duty. Lord, the gunnery officer, asked, his hand hovering over the activation rune. "The saints are still down there." "There are no saints," Hale replied, his eyes open and cold as the void itself. "Only variables that failed to solve the equation. Prepare the cyclonic torpedoes. Atmospheric incineration in T-10 minutes. May the Emperor have mercy on their souls, because I will not." Now, Chapter 12. The Trap of the Apostle. The great bronze doors of the basilica groaned under the assault. Outside, the mob, once the people Jehanne had sworn to protect, screamed for her blood, their fingers scraping against the metal until the nails tore off. Inside, the sanctuary was dark, illuminated only by the dying embers of votive candles. Jehanne sat at the foot of the altar, her helmet removed, revealing a face streaked with soot and tears. Her banner lay on the floor, its golden fabric stained with the mud of the plaza. She had retreated here, not to make a stand, but to hide. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boy's eyes turning purple. She heard the crunch of Morvath's neck. "I tried," she whispered to the silent statue of the Emperor above her. The stone face stared back impassive, offering no comfort. "I only wanted to feed them." From the shadows of the choir loft, a voice answered. It was smooth, rich, and terrifyingly gentle. "And that is your sin, little saint. You tried to give sheep the dignity of wolves. Dark Apostle Alectoris stepped into the light. He did not look like the monster who had corrupted the grain. He had shed his disguise, revealing his true form power armor, adorned with scriptures written in human skin, a crozius maul pulsing with dark energy in his hand. But his face was serene, almost beautiful in its pale, cruel perfection. Jehanne scrambled for her banner, but her limbs felt heavy, weighed down by a crushing lethargy. "Get back!" she gasped, raising a hand that summoned only a flicker of weak light. Alectoris laughed softly, descending the marble steps. "Why fight? Look at what your order has brought you. You gave them bread, and they gave you hatred. You offered them salvation, and they demand your death." He stopped a few paces away, gesturing to the doors, where the banging continued like a drumbeat of madness. "Listen to them, Jehanne. They don't want your emperor. They want freedom. They want to tear down the walls you built. I didn't make them monsters. I just let them be themselves. You poisoned them." Jehanne cried, tears hot in her eyes. "You tricked me." "I told the truth," Alectoris countered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The Imperium is the lie. It promises that if you obey, you will be safe. But look at you. You obeyed. You served. And you are alone." He circled her like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Chaos is honest, Jehanne. We promise nothing but strength. We do not hide our nature behind golden masks. Join us. Your sister Boudica. She already understands the joy of slaughter. She is halfway to us already. Why die for a god who watches you bleed in silence?" He extended a hand, the armor plating etched with runes that hurt the eyes to look at. "Take my hand. Abandon the corpse on the throne. Become the queen of the broken, and I will give you the power to actually save them. Not by feeding them, but by ruling them." Jehanne looked at the hand. For a terrifying second, the logic took root. If the emperor allowed this, was he worthy of her service? The despair was a physical weight dragging her down, urging her to just let go. On the bridge of the Blade of Doctrine, the silence was absolute. The crew had strapped themselves into their crash couches, preparing for the recoil of planetary death. Inquisitor Hale stood by the master control. The glass cover over the firing mechanism was lifted. The red rune pulsed, waiting for the final touch. Target lock confirmed. The gunnery servitor droned. Atmospheric ignition probability 100%. Hale looked at the image of the burning world one last time. He felt no joy, no anger, just the cold resolve of a man amputating a gangrenous limb. For the Emperor, Hale whispered, though it sounded more like an apology than a prayer. He pressed the rune. Cyclone torpedoes release in T-10 minutes. The ship's computer announced the voice, calm and indifferent. "Mark." The screen faded to black, leaving only the blinking cursor of the countdown. Denhausen, 0959, 0958. Chapter 13, Before Hour Zero. The sky above Aurum Him had turned a sickly bruised purple, but the real storm was on the ground. The spire was no longer a seat of government. It was a butcher's yard. Boudica moved through the smoke like a natural disaster. Her sons of the lion had long since stopped distinguishing between the corrupt nobility and the terrified servants. They were just killing, and Boudica was the worst of them. The red lightning around her had darkened, turning the color of dried blood. It crackled with a hateful intensity, feeding off the violence, urging her to swing harder, to kill faster. She didn't see people anymore. She saw obstacles. She saw targets. She cornered a group of survivors against a burning tapestry depicting the Emperor's ascension. They weren't soldiers. They were scribes, cooks, laundry workers caught in the crossfire. To Boudica's fevered vision, they were just more parasites of the system. She raised her maul, the weapon, humming with a lethal charge. No mercy for the leeches, she screamed, her voice distorting into a growl that sounded less human and more like the beast she was becoming. She prepared to turn them into red mist. Stop! A small figure threw itself between the giant warrior and the cowering victims. It was Miracle. She held no weapon. She wore no armor, only a torn tunic stained with the soot of the city. She stood with her arms spread wide, a fragile cross against the coming storm. Boudica hesitated, but the momentum of her rage was hard to arrest. She lowered the maul inches from Miracle's face, the heat singeing the girl's hair. The air smelled of ozone and cooked meat. Move. Boudica snarled, her eyes swimming with madness. Her muscles bunched, fighting the urge to simply swing through the obstruction. You defend them. You stand with the oppressors. Then you die with them. Miracle didn't flinch. She didn't close her eyes. She looked straight into the bloodshot, dilated pupils of the demigod. She didn't see a queen. She saw a victim of her own anger. I am not defending oppressors. Miracle shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of the fire. I am defending you. She pointed at the bodies littering the hallway, not just nobles, but everyone. Look at what you are doing. You aren't freeing anyone. You are doing exactly what the enemy wants. You are killing the very people Jehanne is dying to save. The name struck Boudica like a physical blow. Jehanne. The red haze in her vision flickered. She blinked, the adrenaline crashing in her system. She looked at the shivering scribes behind Miracle, ordinary people terrified not of the Imperium, but of her. She looked at the blood on her own hands, so much of it. It wasn't the blood of tyrants. It was the blood of the city. The roar in her ears began to fade, replaced by the crackling of the fires she had started. Miracle stepped closer, placing a trembling hand on Boudica's scorching armor. If you strike now, you don't become a hero. You become just another monster for the Inquisitor to burn. Is that the legacy of the lion? Boudica staggered back. The lightning died down. The maul slipped from her grip, clanging loudly on the stone floor. She looked at Miracle, then at the carnage. The breath left her in a shuddering gasp. What? Boudica whispered, her voice trembling. What have I done? So Chapter 14, Union Under the Blade. The heavy bronze doors of the basilica did not open. They disintegrated. A shockwave of pure kinetic force blasted them inward, turning centuries-old metal into shrapnel that cut through the gloom of the sanctuary. The mob outside was silenced, thrown back by the sudden eruption of pressure. Through the dust and swirling smoke, a figure walked. Boudica did not run this time. She marched. The frenetic, crackling energy of the berserker was gone, replaced by a focused, terrifying calm. Her armor was scorched black, her furs matted with ash, but her eyes were clear. She stepped over the debris, her maul resting easily on her shoulder. Alectoris hissed, stepping back from Jehanne. The dark apostle looked at the intruder, his perfect face twisting into a mask of genuine hate. You, he spat. You should be bathing in the blood of the spire. Why are you here? Boudica ignored him. She stopped next to Jehanne, who was still on her knees, trembling from the psychic assault. Boudica reached down, offering a hand. It wasn't a command, it was an offer. Sorry I'm late, Boudica grunted, pulling Jehanne to her feet. Traffic was murder. Jehanne looked at the barbarian, seeing the clarity in her eyes. She leaned against her sister, coughing up blood, but a weak smile broke through the grime on her face. You are just in time, Jehanne wheezed. The tea was getting cold. Enough, Alectoris screamed. The sound was not human. It was the screech of tearing metal. If you will not be my queens, You will be my sacrifices. He slammed his Crozius into the marble floor. He didn't just crack the stone, he cracked the dimension. Behind him, reality tore open. A vertical slit of purple light expanded into a gaping maw, a direct portal to the warp. The suction was immediate and violent. Pews, candles, and debris were ripped from the floor and sucked into the void. Gravity inverted. The screaming faces of demons pressed against the thin membrane of the rift, hungry for the souls of the two saints. Burn in the truth, Alectoris laughed, bracing himself against the tide, watching the two women struggle against the impossible pull. Jehanne's boots slid across the floor. She slammed her banner down, trying to anchor them, but the stone was giving way. It's too strong. She cried, her golden light flickering out like a candle in a gale. I cannot hold it alone. Then don't, Boudica roared over the howling wind. She didn't attack the portal. She dropped her maul. She turned and placed both hands firmly on Jehanne's shoulders. I am the storm, Boudica shouted, her voice resonating with the thunder of the feral world she came from. And you are the wall. He wants to open a door. Let's show him what walks through it. Jehanne looked up, her eyes meeting Boudica's. In that moment, the ideological war ended. Order accepted the strength of chaos. Freedom accepted the purpose of order. We do this together, Jehanne whispered, gripping the banner with renewed strength. Or we burn alone, Boudica finished. The reaction was instantaneous. Boudica poured every ounce of her rage, her lightning, and her life force not into her weapon, but into Jehanne. The red lightning flowed into the golden armor, mixing, churning, evolving. The light that erupted from the banner was no longer the soft gold of dawn. It was the blinding, searing orange of a supernova. Jehanne screamed not in pain, but in power. She drove the banner down with the force of a falling star. The energy wave didn't push back against the suction. It reversed it. A cyclone of orange fire spun counterclockwise, catching the warp rift in its teeth. Alectoris's laughter died in his throat. He looked down in horror as his own feet began to slide toward the rift. The portal wasn't just pulling matter anymore. The combined power of the twin saints was shoving him into it. No, the apostle shrieked, clawing at the floor. This is not written. This is... Rewrite it, Boudica yelled. With a final surge, the orange storm slammed into Alectoris. He was lifted off his feet and hurled backward, screaming as he was swallowed by the very hell he had tried to unleash. The rift destabilized, collapsing in on itself, with a sound like a thunderclap that shattered every window in the city. Then silence. Chapter 15. The Gambit of Hail. The bridge of the Blade of Doctrine was a coffin waiting to be nailed shut. The countdown on the main view screen was the only thing moving in a room frozen by dread. T-minus 60 seconds. Vice Commander Vance stood at the secondary firing console. He was a good officer, loyal, unimaginative, and terrified of the Inquisition. His hand hovered over the confirmation rune, his knuckles white. He looked at the tactical display, which showed the planet below writhing in the throes of what looked like a warp storm. To him, it was already dead. Lord Inquisitor Vance set his voice tight. The atmospheric ignition requires duel confirmation. My key is turned. I await your synchronization. Inquisitor Hale did not move. He was staring at the energy readings from the Basilica. The chaotic, jagged spikes of the warp rift had vanished. In their place was a single monolithic column of energy. It wasn't the erratic static of the archenemy. It was stable. It was harmonic. It was unified. Lord Vance barked, panic seeping into his discipline. T-minus 40 seconds. If we do not fire now, the corruption could spread to the fleet. We have to purge it. Hale looked at Vance. In the Vice Commander's eyes, he saw the reflection of his own past. He saw the fear of Cygnus IV. He saw the logic that said it was better to kill 1 billion innocent souls than risk one demon surviving. It was the logic that had defined Hale's entire life. It was safe. It was approved. And suddenly, Hale decided he was bored with being safe. "The parameters have shifted," Commander Hale said quietly. "The parameters are irrelevant." Vance reached for the master override, intending to force the launch sequence himself. "The protocol is absolute. We fire." The bolt pistol crack made a sound like a gavel striking a sounding block. Vance didn't scream. The heavy, mass-reactive shell caught him in the chest, blowing him backward over the tactical console. He hit the deck with a wet thud, the authorization key clattering from his dead hand. The bridge crew gasped as one. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the ventilation and the relentless, mechanical voice of the countdown. T-minus 20 seconds. Hale holstered his weapon with a smooth, practiced motion. He stepped over the body of his second-in-command without looking down. He walked to the main console where the red rune of Exterminatus blinked hungry for the final touch. "Sequence aborted," Hale said, typing in his personal cipher code. The ship groaned as the magnetic locks re-engaged on the cyclonic torpedoes. The red emergency lighting flickered and died, replaced by the sterile white glow of standard operations. The countdown froze at 008, then vanished. The Void Master stared at Hale, her eyes wide with shock. "My lord, you executed him for following your orders. He was following the orders of the past." Hale replied, his voice flat. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped a speck of propellant residue from his glove. He saw a tragedy. "I see an opportunity." Hale looked at the view screen where the storm clouds over Orem Him were beginning to break. "I do not believe in miracles, Void Master, but I believe in firepower. And what happened down there?" He narrowed his eyes. "That is not a religious event. That is a strategic asset. And the Inquisition does not throw away loaded weapons." He turned to the stunned crew. "Prepare a shuttle. I am going down to collect my property." Chapter 16. Crusade of the Broken Coda. 1 week had passed since the Judgment of Fire was suspended. The high port of Orem Him, usually a place of commerce and pilgrimage, had been transformed into a staging ground for war. But this was not the shining, disciplined muster of the Imperial Guard. It was a gathering of ghosts. The soldiers lining up to board the battered cruisers were a motley collection. There were survivors of the Planetary Defense Force with bandaged limbs and haunted eyes. There were the sons of the Lion, former slaves, still wearing their chains as jewelry, their weapons scavenged and crude. There were repentant cultists who had clawed their way back from madness, seeking atonement in death. Inquisitor Hale stood on the observation deck, watching the procession. He did not salute them. He simply observed like a mechanic watching a repaired engine turn over for the first time. "They are a mess," the newly appointed planetary governor remarked, wrinkling his nose at the sight of the unwashed masses. "Broken men, heretics, and savages. You are giving them a fleet Lord Inquisitor. They are hardly a crusade." Hale turned to the bureaucrat. "The Imperium is built on broken stones, Governor. Pristine marble cracks under pressure. These men, they have already shattered. They have nothing left to lose but their lives. That makes them the most dangerous weapon in the sector." He signed the datapad authorizing the deployment. "Let them go. Let them burn. We will see what ashes remain." On the landing pad below, the wind whipped at Morel's hair. She stood with a data slate in her hand and the wind of the warming engines tugging at her tunic. The governor's aide, a stiff man in velvet robes, stood beside her. "The governor is generous," Morel, the aide said, gesturing to the spires of the city that were already being rebuilt. "You were a witness to the saints. You could be the High Secretary. You could write the history of this day from a warm office. You would never have to see a drop of blood again. Mireille looked at the data slate. It was a contract, safety, warmth, a life of quiet dignity. Then she looked up at the ramp of the lead ship, the Penitent Heart. Jehanne was there, checking the armor of a young soldier. Boudica was laughing, sharpening her maul on a piece of bulkhead. They looked tired. They looked scarred. But they looked alive, in a way the aide never would. Mireille handed the data slate back to the aide. "No," she said softly. "No." The aide blinked. "Girl, you are choosing a life of horror. You are choosing to die in the dark." Mireille picked up a laser gun from a crate, checking the power pack, with a practiced motion she hadn't known a week ago. "If everyone stays here to write the history," Mireille said, slinging the rifle over her shoulder, "then there will be no one left to make it." She turned and walked up the ramp, disappearing into the belly of the warship without looking back. The bridge of the Penitent Heart was dim, lit only by the starlight of the deep void. The fleet had broken orbit, leaving the scarred world of Aurum Him behind. Jehanne stood at the viewport, gazing into the infinite black. Her armor was still dented, the gold leaf scratched away to reveal the steel beneath. She didn't look like a statue anymore. She looked like a soldier. Boudica leaned against the console next to her. She had washed the ash from her face, but the wildness in her eyes remained. She wasn't wearing furs. She had looted a commissar's coat, wearing it open over her tribal gear. "We are heading into the Eye," Boudica said, nodding toward the distant, bruising purple scar in the galaxy. "Suicide Run." "A pilgrimage," Jehanne corrected, though a small, sharp smile played on her lips. "We are going to where the darkness is thickest. That is where the light is needed." "You and your light," Boudica chuckled, shaking her head. She reached out, extending her hand. "Just don't get in my way when I start swinging." Jehanne reached out and took Boudica's hand. It wasn't a handshake. It was a circuit closing. The moment skin touched metal gauntlet, the air on the bridge ripped. A small, stable crack in reality opened between them, no bigger than a coin, but bright enough to cast shadows. It crackled with gold and red energy, a miniature singularity born of their union. A servo skull hovering nearby exploded from the sheer pressure of the presence. Boudica looked at the rift, then at Jehanne. She didn't pull away. She grinned, a shark smelling blood. "Show off," Boudica whispered. "Ready?" Jehanne asked. "Always." The fleet jumped, vanishing into the warp, leaving a galaxy in flames behind them. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, being a hero is the fastest way to get executed. We have seen a saint who builds walls and a queen who tears them down. They survived the demon. They survived the heresy. But can they survive each other? And more importantly, did Inquisitor Hale make the right choice by letting them live? Or has he just unleashed a threat greater than chaos upon the Imperium? What would you have chosen? The absolute order of Jehanne, or the righteous fury of Boudica? And do you think Mireille made the right call by getting on that ship? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to see where the Crusade of the Broken goes next, make sure you destroy that like button and subscribe to the channel. The Emperor protects. See you in the next war.